Imagine you are sitting in a cave. You have been sitting there your entire life. You were born there. You grew up there. Everyone you have ever known has been sitting beside you in that same darkness. Your hands and feet are chained. You cannot turn your head. You can only look forward at the cave wall in front of you. And on that wall, shadows. Shapes moving, figures passing, silhouettes of things you cannot fully see or name. And here is the thing. You have never questioned them. Why would you? The shadows are all you have ever known. To you, they are not shadows at all. They are reality. This is not a horror story. This is Plato's most famous idea, written over 2,000 years ago. And it is the most unsettling description of human existence ever put to paper. Because the cave is not a metaphor for ancient ignorance. It is a metaphor for right now, for the life you are living, for the assumptions you have never thought to question, for the shadows on the wall that you have been calling truth. His name was Plato. He was born in Athens around 428 BC into one of the most aristocratic families in Greece. He was expected to enter politics, to lead, to inherit the world his family had built. Instead, he met a man who changed everything. And then he watched that man die. And out of that grief, out of that specific, shattering, irreversible grief, he built a philosophy that has never stopped asking you the hardest question a mind can face. What if everything you think is real is not? Plato was not always a philosopher. As a young man, he was a wrestler, serious enough to compete at the Isthmian Games, one of the great athletic festivals of the ancient world. The name Plato itself is believed to come from his wrestling coach, who gave him the nickname for his broad, powerful build. He wrote poetry. He had political ambitions. He came from a family that had shaped Athenian governance for generations. The path ahead of him was clear. And then, somewhere in his late teens or early 20s, he encountered Socrates. Socrates was not an easy man to encounter. He was short, ugly by Athenian standards, with a flat nose and a habit of stopping people in the street and asking them to define things they assumed they already understood. What is justice? What is courage? What is love? What is knowledge? And then, with infinite patience and a slight smile, he would dismantle every answer they gave, not cruelly, not to humiliate, but because he genuinely believed that the unexamined life was not worth living. Plato met this man and forgot about politics entirely. For the next decade, he followed Socrates through the streets of Athens, watching him question, watching him think, watching him refuse, absolutely refuse, to compromise what he believed for the sake of comfort or safety. And then in 399 BC, when Plato was around 29 years old, Athens put Socrates on trial. The charges were impiety and corrupting the youth. The real crime was thinking too freely in a city that had grown afraid of free thought. Socrates was found guilty. He was sentenced to death. He was given hemlock, a poison, and he drank it. Calmly, deliberately, in front of his friends. Plato was not in the room when it happened. Historical accounts suggest he was ill that day. But he spent the rest of his life in that room anyway. Everything Plato ever wrote, every dialogue, every idea, every question, is in some way an attempt to answer the question that the death of Socrates forced on him. How does a city execute the wisest man it has ever produced? How does ignorance defeat wisdom? How does the shadow on the wall win? Let us go back to the cave, because now you understand where it came from. In his masterwork, The Republic, Plato describes a group of prisoners who have been chained in a cave their entire lives. Behind them, unseen, a fire burns. Between the fire and the prisoners, objects are carried back and forth, and their shadows are cast on the wall the prisoners face. The prisoners cannot see the objects. They cannot see the fire. They cannot see each other's faces. All they can see are the shadows. And so they name the shadows. They study them. They develop expertise in predicting which shadow will come next. They build an entire culture, an entire understanding of reality around things that are not real. Now imagine, Plato says, that one prisoner is freed. He turns around. The fire blinds him. The light is unbearable after a lifetime of darkness. He stumbles. He wants to go back to the wall where things are familiar and manageable and do not hurt his eyes. But someone guides him upward, out of the cave, into the sun. And at first, he still cannot see. The world outside is too bright, too real, too overwhelming. He can only look at reflections in water, then at shadows of real things. Then gradually, painfully, slowly, over time, he begins to see the world as it actually is. And then he looks up, and he sees the sun. Plato calls the sun the form of the good, the highest truth, the source of all reality, the thing that makes everything else visible and real and knowable. And now here is the part that breaks the story open. The freed prisoner goes back into the cave, not because he has to, because he chooses to. He goes back to tell the others what he has seen, to tell them that the shadows are not real, that there is a world outside, vast, luminous, more real than anything they have ever experienced. And the prisoners laugh at him. They tell him the sun has damaged his eyes, that he cannot even see the shadows properly anymore, that he is useless, possibly dangerous. And if he persists, if he keeps telling them the truth, they will kill him. Plato wrote this allegory after watching Athens kill Socrates. He was not writing fiction. He was writing a verdict. But Plato was not only a man of grief, he was also, perhaps more than any philosopher before or since, a man obsessed with a single, luminous, almost unbearable idea. That beauty is real. Not the beauty of a face, not the beauty of a sunset. Those things are beautiful, but they are shadows of beauty. They fade. They disappoint. they die. Plato believed there is a form of beauty, an eternal, unchanging, perfect beauty that exists beyond the physical world, and that when you see something beautiful here, a face, a piece of music, a mathematical proof, what you are actually experiencing is a faint echo of that eternal form. And this is where the symposium comes in. The symposium is one of the strangest and most beautiful texts philosophy has ever produced. It is a dinner party, a group of Athenian men lying around after a feast, taking turns giving speeches about love. Not romantic advice, not poetry, philosophy. Each speaker gives their account of what love is and where it comes from. And then, last to speak, is Socrates. Socrates says he learned everything he knows about love from a woman named Diotima, a priestess, a wise woman whose name means something close to, honored by the gods. And what Diotima taught him changes everything. She said, love begins with a body. You see a beautiful person and something ignites in you. That is real. That is the beginning. But if you follow that feeling carefully, if you pay attention to what it is actually pointing toward, you realize that the beauty in that one body is the same beauty you see in other beautiful bodies. And so love expands. It stops being about one person and starts being about beauty itself. And then you notice beauty in souls, in people who are not physically beautiful, but who are good, deep, wise, alive in a way that makes you want to be near them. And then beauty in ideas, in mathematics, in philosophy, in the structure of truth itself. Until finally, at the top of this long, slow ascent, you arrive at beauty itself. Not a beautiful thing, beauty. Plato called this the ladder of love. And what it describes is not a rejection of human connection. It is an expansion of it. Every person you have ever loved, every face that stopped you, every voice that reached somewhere in you that you did not know existed, was showing you something real. Not just that person, through that person. Love for Plato is not an emotion. It is a form of knowing. After the death of Socrates, Plato left Athens. He traveled for years to Egypt, to Italy, to Sicily, where he tried and failed to turn a tyrant into a philosopher king. The tyrant had him sold into slavery. He was ransomed by a friend. He came back to Athens, and he built something. He founded the Academy, the first institution of higher learning in the Western world. Not a school in the modern sense, a community, a place where people came to think together, to question together, to pursue truth together for as long as it took. The Academy lasted for over 900 years. It outlasted empires. It outlasted dynasties. It outlasted every political system Athens ever produced. And the most famous student who ever walked through its doors was a 17-year-old from a small coastal town who would spend 20 years there, absorbing everything, questioning everything, and eventually building a philosophy that directly contradicted his teachers. His name was Aristotle. You already know that story. But here is what that story tells us about Plato that we sometimes forget. He welcomed the student who would disagree with him. He built a place where disagreement was not just tolerated, it was the point. The man who watched his city execute Socrates for asking too many questions built a school whose entire purpose was to ask more questions. That is not bitterness. That is love. So what does Plato leave you with? Not comfort. Plato never offered comfort. He offers something more demanding and more rare. He offers you the possibility that the life you are living, the assumptions you move through every day without examining, the values you inherited without choosing, the version of reality that everyone around you agrees on without question, might be the cave wall. Not because you are stupid, not because you are broken, but because the cave is comfortable, the shadows are familiar, and the light, when you first turn toward it, hurts. He asks you, what have you never questioned? What do you call reality simply because everyone around you calls it that? What would you see if you turned around, fully, honestly, without flinching, and looked at the fire instead of the wall? And then he asks the harder question. If you found your way out of the cave, if you saw something true, something real, something that changed the shape of everything, would you go back? Would you go back into the darkness to tell the people you love what you had seen, knowing they might not believe you, knowing it might cost you everything? The way it cost Socrates everything? That question is not rhetorical. Plato lived inside it for the rest of his life. He died around 348 BC, at roughly 80 years old, still writing, still thinking, still asking. Some accounts say he died at a wedding feast, pen in hand, mid-sentence. I do not know if that is true, but it feels true. Because Plato was never the kind of man who finished his sentences. He was the kind of man who taught you that the most important sentences, the ones that actually matter, are the ones you finish yourself. The cave is real. The question is what you do about it. This is Philochemy. We will see you in the next one.